Today we're diving into one of my favorite legions to paint, the Raven Guard. Over the years, I've painted 2 Raven Guard armies for the Horus Heresy, one during the first edition and another for the second edition, which I completed over a few weeks leading up to the annual Heretical Hangover event. The Raven Guard have a distinct and dynamic playstyle, built around assassination, infiltration, night fighting, and perfect timing, making them one of the most exciting legions to field on the tabletop. We will be painting a veteran squad using the Plastic Mark VI Tactical Squad, the new melee weapons upgrade set, and Forge World Raven Guard Mark VI upgrade heads. The new melee weapons upgrade set is a long overdue but fantastic addition to the Horus Heresy range. Packed with a wide variety of weapons and arms, this kit offers incredible versatility and can be used across an entire army. I'm especially impressed with its potential, having already used its components to complete a large Wordbearers Despoiler squad and a kitted-out Wordbearers Command squad. These will accompany Captain Mordecai in the next Siege of Chthonian narrative campaign episode. Here's our assembled Raven Guard veteran squad. I couldn't resist equipping the Sergeant with the new Power Lance from the melee kit. It might not be the most thematic choice for the Raven Guard, but it just looks too cool to pass up. To balance it out, I included 2 veterans wielding lightning claws, which are much more emblematic of the Legion's character. The squad also features 2 new Charnabal sabers, 2 plasma guns, a Nuncio Vox, and a Vexilla. I left the plasma guns and lightning claws off the Marines to speed up the painting process. I start by priming the models with Chaos Black spray paint. It takes a few light coats from different angles to achieve full coverage. When we are done with the black primer, I switch to Lead Belcher spray and spray both sides of our lightning claws. I switch to the airbrush and use Vallejo Anthracite Gray and base all of our models. The gray might feel a bit light at this stage, but we will wash it down later, and it will take a much darker tone and look more black. Also, if you look at some of the older Raven Guard color plates, you can see they at times use black iconography. This would only be visible if their armor color was brighter than pure black. Once we have all of the models base coated, I switch to a brush and use a Baden black and block out all of the black details, like bolt pistols, chainsword bodies, Charnable saber hilts, and the grips on our Sergeant's Power Lance. Next, I use Iron Breaker and paint all of the silver details. This includes the chest buckles, armor joints, ablative studs on our pauldrons, power pack details, chainsword and bolt pistol details, blades and details on our Charnable sabers and Power Lance. This is probably the most time-consuming stage when painting Raven Guard. I then clip off our lightning claws and glue them on our Marines. I let them fully dry and then, using Iron Breaker, touch up the clipping points and give them a quick dry brush to brighten them up. Raven Guard veteran legionaries are differentiated by a white stripe over the crest of their helmets. I want to emulate this important detail on our squad to help them stand out from the standard Marines. I start with Celestra Gray and paint the stripe. I find it's easier to paint a thin stripe first and then widen it. I start by centering on the back of the helmet and paint a thin stripe to the center of the eyebrow. Often, the initial thin stripe will not be perfectly straight, but you can correct this when you widen it. Just add width where necessary and straighten the stripe. Take your time on this. Next, I switch to Eshin Gray and do a quick highlight over our blacks. I highlight our bolt pistols, chainswords, Vox antennas, and weapon hilts and grips. You can also touch up any brush slips on our armor and make corrections to our helmet stripes if necessary. Using Corn Red, I paint our lenses on our Nuncio Vox and helmet antenna. I then take my time and carefully paint all of the helmet lenses on our squad. Next, I use Caliban Green and paint the green gauge lenses on our Nuncio Vox and helmet antenna. Then I use Mephiston Red and do a second coat on our red Nuncio Vox lenses and helmet eye lenses to brighten them up. Switching to Warboss Green, we are going to do a similar highlight on the green gauge lenses on our Nuncio Vox and helmet antenna. Using White Scar, I return to our helmet stripes and paint a second coat to brighten them up. I use multiple thin layers and progressively bring up the white until it looks right. Next, using Runelord Brass, I paint the base on the small raven emblems on our Legion-specific helmets and the brass details on our lightning claws. I follow this up with a quick highlight of Retributor armor. This highlight will give the brass a slightly gold shine. Now we can use Nuln oil shade and wash down our models. Being able to wash multiple layers in a single swift, indiscriminate step makes Raven Guard one of the most efficient legions to paint. It's at this step our anthracite armor will darken a few shades and take on a more black look. I let the models fully dry before returning to Retributor armor and painting all of our gold details. These include the guards and pommels on our swords and power lance, Nuncio Vox halo, and the details on our Legion Vexilia. Using Kislev flesh, I paint the base flesh tone on our sergeant's face. I'm starting with Kislev to achieve a lighter finished skin tone. I follow this up with a medium highlight of Flayed 1 flesh, and then finish with a thinner white scar highlight. Next, I use Xandri dust and paint the base color on the Nuncio Vox skull and Legion Vexilia parchment. I then use Ushabti bone and do a quick highlight, focusing on the raised areas. For the Legion Vexilia, I use Abaddon black and carefully paint the scripture. It's important to use just the tip of your brush and a small amount of paint. I then return to white scar and do a final highlight. For the Vexilia parchment, you can highlight straight over your black scripture as it will still show through the highlight. Using Ironbreaker, I return to our golds and give them a dry brush highlight. Using Reikland flesh shade, I wash down our sergeant's face. The shade wash will do a lot of work here, blending the layers and settling into the recesses. I then wash down the Legion Vexilia parchment and Nuncio Vox skull. I then use Agrax Earthshade and wash down all of our gold details. Now let's transition to the accessory sprue. I clip the top half of the sprue, leaving only one attachment point to the holsters, pouches, and grenades. I clean up the edges with my hobby knife. I prime the entire sprue with Citadel Chaos black spray paint. Next, using Citadel Caliban green, I paint the frag grenade bodies. Then, using Citadel Iron Breaker, I paint the frag grenade lugs, safeties, holster, and pouch buckles, and crack grenades. I switch to Citadel Warboss green and highlight the frag grenade bodies. Next, I use Citadel Eshin Gray and do a loose highlight over all of the holsters and pouches. I wash everything with Citadel Nuln oil shade. After everything has fully dried, I clip all of the parts off and with a hobby knife, clean up any excess sprue. I touch up the black holsters and pouches with Citadel Abaddon black and the silver on the grenades with Citadel Iron Breaker. Let's add some iconography to our veteran squad from the Forge World and 40K transfer sheets. I cut out some standard Legion icons, Legion numeral for the Vexilia, squad markings, and squad numerals. To apply them, I dip the transfers in water and let them soak until they are loose. I then use Walther's Solvaset to wet the target surface. Using an older brush, I lift the transfer onto the model. I then use my hobby knife and do minor adjustments to align the transfer into its final position. Do note, while I am putting the transfer on with the Raven head facing backwards, I believe it should be facing forward, despite seeing artwork with it both ways. I'm keeping my Ravens facing backwards, because it's a detail I overlooked when I quickly painted my force, and I want everything to be consistent. I let all of the transfers fully dry before adding another layer of Walther's Solvaset over the top, which will help soften and snuggle the transfers into place. To weather our Marines, I start with Eshin Gray and do a very light sponge weather. This will represent small paint chips. I then follow it up with Iron Breaker and do a second sponge weather that represents more recent damage. I focus around the areas the Marines' armor would take the most wear and tear as they traverse the battlefield. I tend to go pretty light on my sponge weathering. Less can be more. Let's paint our plasma guns and sheathed chainswords. Starting with Iron Breaker, I paint all of the silver details on the chainswords and plasma guns. I then use Runelord brass and paint the coils on the plasma guns. Using Eshin Gray, I do a loose highlight over the chainswords and their scabbards. I highlight the plasma guns and paint the armored hands on them. I then use Retributor armor and highlight the plasma gun coils. Returning to our accessories, I cut the pistol grips off these for our Marines with their pistols drawn, and these for our plasma gunners and sergeant, and I have a nice mix of small pouches and grenades. I take my time and glue all of the accessories onto the Marines. Holsters and accessories add a lot of character and subtle variation to your units, and better help them represent their war gear in the rules. After accessories, we can glue our plasma guns and sheathed chainswords on as well. I let the glue dry and then return with Nuln oil and wash down the sheathed chainswords and the plasma guns. Our veterans are nearly complete, with just the basing left to finalize. Basing your Space Marines with a plain dirt style is a great choice that enhances the realism and provides a neutral backdrop to make the bright colors of your Marines pop. I use the same basing method on all of my models, creating a visually cohesive collection. My previous 2 painting guides featured the Iron Hands and Salamander's legions, who fought alongside the Raven Guard as Shattered Legions. By maintaining consistent basing across all these factions, I can seamlessly combine models from each legion into a unified and purposeful-looking Shattered Legion's army. Using PVA glue and an old paintbrush, I brush the glue onto the Marine's base. I then dip the base in a fine sand mix. Make sure the sand is fully covering the glue. You can use a finger and wipe off any sand hanging over the lip of the base. I let the bases dry and then paint over the sand with a generous coat of Citadel Dryad bark. I go pretty heavy on the Dryad bark. It will dry down onto the sand and further help fix it onto the base. Next, I dry brush Citadel Mournfang Brown over the sand. Then I do a final dry brush of Citadel Ushabti Bone. Using Reikland Flesh Shade, I do a generous wash. This helps blend the different shades of brown. I paint the rim of the base with Citadel Steel Legion Drab. Usually it takes 2 coats to get even coverage. Using weathering powders, I powder the Marine's lower legs and base. This will give a subtle weathering to the Marine and help ground the model into the sand. I crack out the tester's dull coat and seal all of the models. Our Raven Guard veteran squad is now complete and ready to deploy to the wastelands of Chthoniya. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, and subscribe for more Age of Darkness videos.